Up to now we've been looking at how NGINX serves files and interprets requests, but of course for any web server to be of much use we need to be able to deal with the server-side programming languages such as PHP. So in this video we'll finally see how to install PHP FPM and configure NGINX to act as a proxy between PHP FPM and the client. We'll begin by installing PHP FPM, or in this case PHP 5 FPM, which is just a naming convention to indicate that this is for the PHP 5 version. And again, I'll just speed these installs up a bit. Then we'll install PHP 5 MySQL to be able to interact with our MySQL server. Then PHP 5 itself. And finally, PHP 5 CGI to support fast CGI. Now, you might not need all of these, or you might need additional components depending on what operating system you're using. But you'll find plenty of documentation for installing PHP FPM, so just follow what is suggested for your operating system and it should be a fairly simple, straightforward process. Okay, to best demonstrate this, I've added a fresh copy of WordPress to the sites directory on my test server, and I've made some changes to the configuration file, of which the most important ones are changing the root directive to point to that WordPress directory and defining some index files. These are just files to look for in order of importance, should a request point to a directory. Then we have a basic root location block and a location block for matching files ending in .php. It's important to understand that this PHP location will take priority over the root location due to it being a regular expression match. We discussed this in the video about location blocks and modifiers should you want to go back and check. And finally, inside the PHP location block we include the default fastCGI params file, variables file and the fastCGI pass directive, which tells NGINX where to communicate with PHP FPM. Now, it's important to know that this can be done in one of two ways, and both NGINX and PHP FPM need to know where the other is listening. So to make sure of this, we'll go check PHP FPM's configuration file, which is located in etc/php5/fpm, and then the one we're looking for is always the www.conf file, and not the PHP FPM conf file. This can be misleading, but we'll almost always be wanting to make changes in the www.conf file. So I've opened that file in my editor, and if you look down here on line 33, you'll see we have the listen option, which right now is pointing to a Unix socket file, and not to that TCP port that we defined in our NGINX configuration. Basically, PHP FPM will listen on either a Unix socket or a TCP port, and whilst both have their advantages, it's really nothing significant. So we'll simply update that PHP FPM config file to listen on that same TCP port we defined in our NGINX configuration. But we could just as easily have changed the NGINX configuration to match PHP FPM, as long as they are both communicating with each other at the same place. Back on our server, we'll just make sure everything is running, head over to our browser and reload, and we get this bad gateway. And this would be because I forgot to restart PHP FPM after making the change from the Unix socket to the TCP port. And restart PHP FPM, reload the browser again, and voila. We can now see that NGINX is receiving that request for a PHP page, passing it to PHP FPM, which is processing it, and passing it back to NGINX as HTML content. Of course, this is a fresh copy of WordPress, so I'll have to configure the database. And when I hit go here, again, we're getting all these WordPress PHP files served with what was really very little configuration. I'll just now configure this install with my database credentials, and then we'll see the working install of WordPress. Okay, I'm back, and I've entered all my database details, run the install script, and as you can see we're at the WordPress login screen, and the WordPress admin loads just fine, and finally we can see that default version of our new WordPress install. So like I said in one of the first videos, whilst this is a little bit more work to configure than say Apache, it's really not that big a deal and is actually fairly simple to set up. Either way, the performance and resource benefits of running PHP this way is well worth the extra configuration. And whilst we've just done this for PHP, it's equally easy to configure a backend for the likes of Ruby or even Node.js. That wraps up the basics of configuring a backend for NGINX, and in the next video we'll take a quick look at configuring NGINX workers and other process-related settings.